Good morning. Okay. Before we get started, I want to share that we will be hosting simultaneous interpretation of this meeting into Spanish. I want to introduce our translator with Spanish language instruction. Carlos, are you here? Where's Carlos?
I am. Good morning.
No lo veo.
Good morning.
All right.
So I'm here virtually.
Virtually. And I was like,
yes.
I can't see Carlos. Can anybody else see Carlos and I can't see him? Okay. All right.
Okay. So good morning, buenos días. I will begin with the announcement in Spanish. Para hacer uso de la interpretación, si nos acompaña vía Zoom, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla donde aparecen sus controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etcétera, presionaría primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Hello once again. For those who are joining us via Zoom, to use the interpretation feature, please scroll down to the bottom of the screen where the meeting controls are. There, click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and select English as your language. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, you press more, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. If you are joining us today at Sandag and need interpretation into Spanish, please check out a headset from the receptionist on the 7th floor. The headset looks like a little iPod and comes with an earpiece, which you can use to hear the meeting in Spanish. You simply hold the earpiece to your ear and the interpreter will come on automatically. Si nos acompaña presencialmente en la sala de Sandag y necesita interpretación al español, por favor diríjase a la recepción del piso 7 y solicite un receptor. El receptor parece un pequeño iPod y se puede utilizar para escuchar la reunión en español. Simplemente sostenga el auricular junto a su oído y la interpretación comenzará automáticamente. Thank you very much, Chair. This concludes the announcement.
Thank you. And I did fail to mention that it is a joint meeting of the Sandag Transportation and Borders Committee. If you could please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to ask our clerk, Ms. Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum for both committees. Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum for both bodies.
Thank you. This is the first meeting in over 2 years where we are back in person. The last Transportation Committee meeting held in this room was March 6th of 2020, and so I am thrilled that we're back. Today, we're holding a special joint meeting with our colleagues on the Borders Committee. We're excited about the opportunity to sit side by side and discuss some of our region's vital efforts. Borders Committee Vice Chair Vivian Moreno will act as chair of the Borders Committee on this special occasion, and we're grateful for the support and chance to work with the Borders Committee today. As committee members are all here in person and members of the public are able to participate in either in person and virtually. Let's quickly talk about how this meeting is going to work. After each item, we will take an in-person public comments, followed by virtual public comments, and then member comments. If you are a member of the public here in the room, please submit a speaker slip to the clerk For those virtual, please continue to raise your virtual hands via Zoom when we call for public comments on an item. For committee members, we have new wireless microphones, so please use those when speaking in the boardroom so those joining us virtually can hear. We also have headsets available for providing English interpretation should any comments be provided in Spanish. Members of the public can also obtain headsets from the reception desk in the lobby. Since today's agenda includes action items only for the Transportation Committee, members should have voting devices or clickers at your seat. Please let us know if you're a Transportation Committee member and you need a device. My last note is that I have another committee meeting at 11 a.m. that I'm going to have to step out of, so I'm going to go ahead and pass the gavel to Vice Chair Campillo at that time if we run a little bit longer, and so you absolutely will be in good hands. With that, our first item on the agenda is public comment or member comments. We're going to first take the first in-person or virtual on agenda public comment. Ms. Francesca, do we have any submitted speaker slips or any raised hands on Zoom?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one in-person public comment and one virtual on this item. First, we'll take the in-person from Dr. Tim Bilash. If you'd like to step up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, committee. Thank you for having these public comments and for your continued effort in transportation and its touches to the county. I'm a physician up in Del Mar. I wanted to bring up an issue I faced. Last month, I went up to a public event northwest of Los Angeles, and I thought I would take public transportation instead of a car. And it's not a long car drive. It's far enough. And public transportation, there's some time issues sometimes, but it seemed possible. It took me about a half hour to figure out a route. There were several alternatives. There were maybe two Amtrak plus 2 buses or other kinds of things for this particular location. After I picked the route, I couldn't figure out how to pay for it. There were 3 different agencies involved. And it didn't take me when the places that I went were non-public sites or private sites. It wasn't clear. So I had the route out, so I took my car. So the suggestion I wanted to make is I know you're working on integration of a lot of parts of the different system, and convenience and practicality, plus knowing you can get back once you're there to get us out of the cars, is an issue I wanted to highlight this morning. Thanks for having meetings in public. Thanks for your Zoom meetings and the coordination and the hard work that I see the staff doing over the last year and a half. You have my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll go to virtual public comments. We'll have Catherine Rhodes. You can go ahead when you're ready.
Lovely. Thank you so much. This is Catherine Rhodes, and I want to thank you all so much for asking for that $500 million from the Airport Authority to Sandag for the promised 14% transit to the airport that was approved in the airport's 2008 master plan and EIR. So that's what, 14 years later. Before the FAA airport district officer in LA approves using the $500 million in normally restricted airport revenues offsite, airport staff needs to update their July 2021 airport layout plan to include the central mobility hub at port headquarters and aerial ramp connections to Interstate 5 to the rental car center as future potential projects. According to the FAA, ADO, and airport staff, years ago, no normally restricted FAA airport revenue funds can be used unless there's an actual future potential project approved in the airport layout plan for the FAA LDO in Los Angeles to approve. In the new airport layout plan, I recommend adding the full area east of the airport to the train tracks from Washington to Laurel Street, which should be at least 40 acres into a new airport layout plan. That way you could do basically anything you want now and into the future. In addition, please add a transportation corridor down Pacific Highway to the Convention Center and the 12th Avenue, 12th and Imperial MTM station. I saw that you guys were going to put the location along Harbor Drive. when it gets to by the county administration, but I recommend just going down Pacific Highway instead. And so also I agree with staff that port headquarters is a superior alternative for the central mobility hub. Sandag should protect themselves and Sandag board members from the city of San Diego's plan for the central mobility hub to be located in the middle of downtown, to include the 101 Ash Street property litigation. To the Sandag board, please do not become involved with that 101 Ash Street project. San Diego City Hall on C Street should have been condemned 20 years ago. That City Hall building is very dangerous. When a new City Hall was discussed last month, many people said that they would like to follow the 1908 Nolan plan for a new City Hall on Port Tidelands on Pacific Highway, Harbor, Hawthorne, and Grape Street, if only it was close to a transit stop. This is your opportunity to get a new City Hall and a new transit stop, all paid for by airport revenue. And the last thing I want to mention is, I think, based on that video I showed before with the 30-foot deep corridor, I think you should ask Elon Musk to come to San Diego and see about doing a project from the border all the way to Pacific Beach with his project on Port Tidelands. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Now, are there any committee members that have any comments? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First, I'd like to welcome and thank all committee members today for participating in this dialogue in representation of the rich cultural heritage of a unique history of the region, which the Borders Committee proudly recognize. I'd like to briefly state for the record that we respectfully acknowledge that we live and work on traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of tribal nations, including the Kumeyaay, Luiseño, Capeño, and Coahuila people. We share strong historical and cultural roots that unite us with all of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair Vargas, and good morning to all of you. Last week, Caltrans announced $34.7 million of transportation planning grants, of which 2.6 million were granted to this region. So we're really happy about that because good transportation starts with great planning. Some of the recipients of the grants included the cities of Lemon Grove, La Mesa, Oceanside, and also Sandag and MTS received a series of grants. What these grants are looking at are things like complete streets, multimodal access, connecting schools and parks, completing the coastal rail trail, zero emission vehicle incentives, transit priority treatments, automated passenger accounting, and advanced air mobility technology. The second thing I wanted to mention is that this month is Earth Day, and or Earth Month, I should say, and Earth Day is actually a week from today. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing at Caltrans together with Sandag to provide for transportation options and also implement transportation policies that will help reduce pollution. Along those lines, Caltrans will be doing some events on April 23rd, which is a week from tomorrow. And I wanted to share those because they will impact a little bit the mobility in the region. On Saturday, a week from tomorrow, we will be doing swarm maintenance on State Route 125 from Hamasha Boulevard to State Route 94. That means northbound 125 and the northbound ramps will be closed during the day so that our crews can be picking up litter, doing graffiti removal, tree trimming, vegetation control, all sorts of maintenance activities, and so that they can do it safely. And I mentioned safely because on April 26, we will be hosting our Highway Worker Memorial. That's when we remember the 189 workers that died in the line of duty while serving the people of California. And that's just a Caltrans worker. It doesn't include construction workers, emergency responders. So I wanted to ask all of you to help us push the message of being work zone aware and slowing down when people see maintenance workers or emergency responders on our roads. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members? I did want to just say thank you. This morning, we did launch our Youth Opportunity Passes, and this is the first pilot program of its kind, and it's going to be a game changer for our youth. And so I wanted just to thank SANDAG, MTS, NCTD. I think it's going to be fantastic for our youth, and so I want to make sure that we highlighted that and thank all of SANDAG staff for all the great work. The other update I did want to mention is that on April 6, 2021, the Board of Supervisors and my colleague is also here with us today. We had our planning and development staff presented the 2021 County General Plan Annual Progress Report. And during that presentation, staff highlighted the differences in the SANDAG RENA allocations compared to SANDAG's regional plan forecast for housing production in the unincorporated areas. And so as a region, we're focusing on addressing both the climate crisis and housing crisis. And SANDAG has provided the county with two different numbers for housing in an unincorporated area. One number is from the Regional Plan Sustainable Community Strategy forecast that's focused on the transportation network and reduces greenhouse gas emissions to address our climate crisis. And then there's a different number, which is the higher number for the RENA allocation that's focused on addressing our housing crisis. So the County of San Diego is really looking forward to working with SANDAG to bring these two numbers into alignment so that the county and the cities in the region all have a clear guidance on the goals we need to meet for housing and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so I just want to make sure that county staff wanted to inform you that county staff will be sending a letter to SANDAG highlighting the discrepancies between the two numbers and requesting that those numbers are aligned so that the numbers for housing goals and RENA allocation with those in the Regional Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. And so we're really looking forward to work with SANDAG to address this together. Next, for the next item, we had a request to switch the sequence of the agenda from item 2 and 3. So we will first hear item 3 and then come back to agency report in item 2.
So item 3, thank you, Chair Vargas, Vice Chair Campillo, board members. So we're gonna talk about item 3. It's Otay Mesa 2. And before I introduce the team, the amazing team that worked on this, I just want to let you know this is a partnership between Caltrans and SANDAG. It's a partnership as an example for the rest of the state and the country. Some of you, I think, were on the tour last week to Otay Mesa 2, and many of you visited that site. I think when you're there, you get the appreciation of the work that has been done in the last decade or so. When I started here a bit over 3 years ago, I think in meeting with Mario, I said, Mario, we need to cut the ground and cut the ground soon, because this is, one, it's an amazing project, it's a national project with our largest trading partner. And two, you don't want to be talking about things, you want to do them, right? So we went to work, many trips to Mexico City, meeting with our partners in Mexico. Gustavo and myself and the team and Mario were in several meetings regarding this project. Last week, or a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and that was on the top of the agenda. Our congressional members from both parties, Republicans and Democrat, and the two senators, Senator Padilla and Feinstein, signed a letter urging the administration to fund the staffing for the facility. We met with the highest level. We met with the Secretary of Transportation, the Commissioner for Custom Patrols, with the Undersecretary of Homeland Security to secure a budget for the staffing. We're not there yet, but we're very hopeful that that staffing will be there. Coming back to what we're doing right now. One is we are still hoping to open this facility to San Diegans and to Baja California residents in September 2024, which means we need to start building. Later this summer, we're hoping to put the RFP out for site preparation. Betsy, who is our counsel, is working with our Mexican partners to finalize a binding legal agreement that we hope to sign later this month. And our CFO is going to talk to you today that we are already in line to receive a TIFIA loan and go to the market. Things are happening. $600 million has been invested. 50% of it came from the federal government, 40% from the state government, and 10% from your local sales tax money. So I am excited for this project, the binational project. That is so important for both communities in Baja and Baja California. Both regions of 7 million people need this border crossing. And finally, I would say this border crossing is will be distinguished from any other, that will be the most technologically advanced border crossing with the state-of-the-art ITS, where people crossing the border from both sides, hours before they get to the border, they would know the wait time, the cost, etc. We have an amazing team that led by the project director, no other than Mario Orso. And this team truly is, it's an honor for me to work with such a team. So I'm gonna turn it to them and we're gonna do a presentation and then we'll be happy to take your questions. So Mario, it's all yours.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you to both committees for having us here. Probably an opening statement for me. It's, you see I have a Band-Aid here. Use sunscreen. I didn't get beat up. It's the sun beat me up. So a good piece of advice for health-wise now that the summer's coming, use sunscreen. So now we're gonna give you an overview of where we are with the Otay Mesa East project, what we have accomplished, but also, the CFO will be discussing where we are with the financing, some of the results of the traffic and revenue. Thank you. and the project manager, Maria Rodriguez, will be talking about the delivery. I always give an advice to my team, it's follow the money, right? If you don't follow the stream of funding, you won't be able to deliver anything. So that's why it's so important that CFO Andre Dujan provides an update of where we are and how we're planning to finance part of this project, the remaining piece, and Maria, the project manager, together with the other project manager, Nikki Tianco, who's behind us, how they're planning to deliver this project. So we're going to give you an update just briefly. My update is going to be extremely brief because Hassan does such a great job providing the update. Pretty much, I hope most of you have been to the site. The project is a corridor project. We learned from School of Hard Knocks doing the 905 and Otay Mesa that you need to do the ports of entry together with their transportation facilities, not like Otay Mesa that opened in the 80s and the 905 ended up opening in 2012 totally. That's a huge example of how things probably should not be done in the future. That's why we embarked all together in a corridor process to deliver this project, with the transportation facility, the transit facilities being also visualized, in clearing the environmental document with the port of entry and the supporting facilities and transportation facilities all together. And that was done in 2012. It started in 2008. We've been working on this project since that time. Like Hassan mentioned, we've invested up to $592 million. You could see the breakdown, the 51% federal dollars, 40% state, and 9% local. By this fall, we will be finished totally with all the transportation facilities leading to the port of entry, and that leads us to be laser focused on delivering the port of entry. We have cleared the project environmentally. We have all the right-of-way. We have the presidential permit to pierce the border. It now remains on us to build this port of entry as the next piece, which is this green, the green piece that you see. It's a huge piece of property, 120 acres. you could fit a San Isidro and an Otay Mesa port of entry together in this property. We're not going to open a port of entry of that size at opening day. We're reserving that property to be able to grow as time permits. So this is our port of entry for the 21st century. And like Hassan mentioned, it has to be technologically driven. It is a port of entry or a facility that will be dynamically tolled and will be managing the wait times based on, we will be managing the toll rates based on the wait time with a target of 20%. When we were doing the environmental document for this project, there were questions about equity and how would we manage the equity component in the pricing component of this project. And the environmental document concluded and committed the department to not pursue ever any tolling on the 905 or the 5 that would always leave the options of San Isidro and Otay Mesa being a free option. By opening this facility, what's going to happen at the other ports of entry that at certain peak hour times, the wait times are going to be reduced at the other border crossings by up to 50%. So those are just some of the elements and updates. Last summer, we did sign a memorandum of understanding with Mexico on major features for the project, the tolling location, which is going to be on the US side, a single toll northbound and southbound that's going to be shared between both countries. And CFO Andre Dujan will talk a little bit about that. And in the near future, we will be coming with some action items on that aspect. Like Hassan mentioned, Betsy and the rest of the team are working very hard in some very interesting and complex negotiations with the Mexican government. We also highlighted in that agreement the ITS aspects, that they need to work in a mirror perspective and connection perspective, as well as, like Hassan mentioned, the delivery of this project with a target date of September 2024. So I'm just going to take you through a virtual flyover of the project, and then I'll let CFO Andre Dujan talk about the financing strategy and Maria Rodriguez to talk about the delivery methodology and the next steps. You could see this is a flyover on State Route 11. We have opened half of it, and we pretty much are in the near future going to be finishing, like I said, in the fall, all the transportation facilities. We're flying over what's called a diverging diamond. That's a special type of interchange that moves traffic to different sites, different locations, or the opposite direction in a traditional way. And then we're approaching our port of entry. The last interchange is Siempre Viva, which is being constructed, and the county's already building their companion transportation facilities there. If you see some piece of land, the 10 areas piece of land is what we've acquired. We have reserved some property for a future transit station. And you could see as we're approaching the odd shape circle or oval is the state facility, commercial vehicle enforcement facility that will be operated by the Highway Patrol. And then you could see the port of entry as we're moving. And you could see the 10 area of the property reserved. The team has been planning this project in a modular way that will allow us to grow. Opening day, it's very similar to Calexico East from a size perspective, which is in between Tecate and Otay Mesa from a size perspective. 5 passenger vehicles northbound, inspection booths, and 5 inspection booths for commercial vehicles, with the capacity of shifting them or at peak hours, and even having the majority of the lanes being either commercial or passenger vehicle wise. Our next phase on the project is going to be, like I said before, the transportation facilities are going to be finished. Like Hassan mentioned, we will be having a site preparation job that has already been advertised, and we should be breaking ground on this project by this summer. This technically signifies the beginning of the port of entry work in that area. Together, we have also been awarded funds to bring in all the utilities and to begin the preliminary design, basically doing that design build contract that Maria will be talking about. This work is for the port of entry as well as for the state facility. And very important also is going to be that tolling system and intelligent transportation system that's going to allow us to have that variable tolling. So this is pretty much a brief synopsis of the project and some history about it, being that we're presenting so much new information today to this both committees that have been very supportive. So I'm going to pass it on to CFO Andre Dujan to discuss the financing strategy.
Before you leave, before Andre starts, could you go back to the map of the site, please? So in this map, you see here the CBX, the cross-border crossing, then the Otay, and then Otay to adjust. We were in the 5 big moves that we adopted last December. We do have what we call the purple line or the subway that's going to connect all of those. And as Vice Chair Marino knows, mobility in that region require a state-of-the-art mass transit system. So we're hoping to start, I mean, we have some funding that Mario made available to start the San Isidro Mobility Hub work, but we're hoping to start the environmental work on the subway line that will connect all of those and connect it up through National City, Chula Vista, Corona Mesa, San Diego, all the way to Oceanside. Just want to let you know that while this is a border crossing, it is also about how to transport people from both sides of the border. Go ahead.
Thank you, Hassan. Merit to have merits. Gustavo was the one who has made the decision, my boss here, about assisting the San Isidro mobility.
I give Mario the credit because he, like 5% of his time, he works for Sandak. So, you know, it is Gustavo. Thank you, Gustavo.
Okay, thank you, Mario, and good morning, committee members. So before I get into the slides, I just want to put things in context a little bit. Currently, Sandag has 3 bond indentures. The first one is on Sandag's actual bonds that are backed by the FFGA that we have, the full funding grant agreement by the federal government that received $1 billion for the Mid-Coast project. Currently outstanding is $335 million. Then the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission, the Transnet that is backed by our 0.5% sales tax. We have currently approximately $2.4 billion outstanding in bonds. And lastly, the SR 125 that is backed by the toll revenues, approximately 178 million outstanding. So the OME will be the 4th indenture, and it's most similar to our SR 125, and our experience with that toll facility is certainly very relevant to this project. Now, that being said, this is definitely the most challenging credit that we've had to work with, because it's not just a local issue and project like the other indentures that I described, but we have a number of state agencies that we're having to work with. Caltrans, Mario being right next to me, the federal government. And not only that, it's also working with a foreign government, with Mexico. So another challenge is that this is also a greenfield project, a brand new startup project, as opposed to SR 125 when we purchased it out of bankruptcy. We had some history on it. But frankly, these are the reasons why we get up every day, and these are the kind of challenges that we really like to take on. And generally, when we put together a bond financing, we put together a team, we assemble a team. We have done exactly the same here. So PFM is our financial advisors on this project. Barclays are our underwriters, or our investment banking firm. And then Norton Rose Fulbright is acting as our bond and disclosure counsel here in the US. And we also have counterparts of them working in Norton Rose in Mexico. So Transnet is a sales tax based, and later you'll hear we've had some tremendous growth recently, and it's a AAA rated credit. And part of it is because of the diversity in the sales tax base. But just like SR 125, the Autumn Mesa East, we are only looking at the toll revenues to be pledged to pay off the debt, and there'll be no other Sandag revenues that will go towards it. So the most important aspect of the project to investors is whether we have sufficient revenues to cover the debt service. And so the main question to answer is this standalone financially feasible as a project? And so one of the team members that we hired, probably the most important, is CDM Smith, to do an investment grade and revenue study, which is really the basis for our financial models. So today in front of you, we will be covering the investment grade traffic and revenue study results. We'll look at the capture rates, the gross toll revenues. Then we'll look at the project funding requirements, the debt service coverage, and then lastly, the flow of funds. So this is a little bit of a busy chart, but basically what it is the weekday capture summary. And so what we're trying to look at here is the total crossings by port, by each one of them that are out there. San Ysidro, the Otay Mesa that's existing, and the OME East, which is our facility. So if you look at the left charts, by 2025, we expect approximately 15,000 daily crossings out of the total 150,000 crossings. So approximately 10% capture rate for the border. And if you can see through 2035 and 2050, the top line numbers, it's 10 to 11%. So we're not capturing a tremendous amount of the traffic, but that's good news because we don't need even the lion's share to make this financially feasible. And then when you look on the right side, you'll see the commercial vehicles and the passenger vehicles. And the good news that gives investors further comfort is that 15,000 of the trips in 2025, 88% or 13,000 are passenger vehicles, which is a more consistent and reliable traffic because the commercial vehicles sometimes are tied to economic fluctuations. So again, the takeaway from this chart is that the capture that we have is sufficient. It doesn't have to be a big amount, but enough for us to proceed. And here we actually look at the gross toll revenues. And we're looking at these through 2062. And the reason why we're going through 2062 is basically because that's how long our bonds will be outstanding. So there's a total of $5.3 billion that is going to be captured through this facility. But if you look at the ramp up, it's fairly slow. So in 2025, we're looking at approximately $15 million. By 2033, grows to $68 million. And ultimately through 2062, where we're capturing $267 million. Now, clearly the debt in 2062 does not concern me as much because, I'll be frankly 100 years old, but what does concern me and the financial team is the initial part, the $15 million. And so there's a ramp up that happens. So we have to make sure that our debt service structure fits within that. So this slide shows the total amount of what the project is going to cost on the US side as well as on the Mexico side. So it's just over $1 billion on the US side, about approximately $250 million on the Mexico side. And focusing on the US side, so far we've funded and paid for $150 million of the right-of-way, and then $415 million of the roadway improvements. So we've actually funded 55% of the project to date. And as Mario and Hassan said earlier, 50% came from the federal, 40% from the state, and we've only had to put approximately 9 to 10% of local funds on this project. The numbers in red is what we're actually remaining to be paid. So $394 million will be the actual cost for the port of entry. And then the other two is a commercial vehicle enforcement facility, approximately $48 million, and the ITS structure, approximately $26 million. So that is what remains unfunded, $468 million, and that will be, majority of it will be funded by debt.
So, Andre, before you leave this is important. So, first of all, does the 468 include the inflation, the latest inflation, or no?
So these are the latest costs that we have to date today.
So this is with the latest cost. That could go up a little bit, but this number does not include the staffing for the facility when it's open. And that is why our discussion in Washington, D.C. about the federal government commit in the federal budget and the Homeland Security budget, at least a $50 million of staffing is so important and so critical. So if you ever hear about the most important thing we need for this project to move forward is for the federal government to spill out in the federal budget, because that $50 million a year is not included in this 468.
Correct. Thank you. So looking at the $468 million, we anticipate issuing approximately $170 million in bonds. The TIFIA loan proceeds approximately $224.5 million. We have already opened up a letter of interest with the TIFIA office, and we've been working with them. The good news is we refinanced out of a TIFIA loan for SR 125. We got a TIFIA loan for the Mid-Coast Corridor project. So we have some very good experience with the TIFIA office, and we've actually had a good reputation with them, which helps as well. And then approximately $74 million remains unfunded. Now, we do anticipate they'll be able to get some SB1 TSEP Cycle 3 funding or some kind of federal grants to pay for this. Obviously, the IIJA is a great option for us right now. And although $74 million sounds like a lot of money, Mario and his team have previously secured, as we mentioned, $565 million in funds for this project to date. And so we're fairly confident that we can secure the balance needed for this project. Now, the chart on the left shows that the annual debt service, which is backloaded, the pink is the bond payments, and the gray bars on top of it is a TIFIA repayment. So one of the benefits of the TIFIA loan is generally that it's significantly cheaper than your traditional bond financing. It's tied to the 30-year Treasury, which today is approximately 2.8%. But besides the cheaper rate that it offers, it's also very flexible. So as you can see from the chart, we don't have to start making principal payments until at least 5 years after substantial completion. And as you can see, it's on the belly of the curve, and kind of ascending structure. And again, it'll be sitting on the second lien as opposed to the bond financing, which will be sitting on the first lien. As we worked with our financial team with the PFM and Barclays, we know that we need to get at least a BBB- grade for this facility, 2 of them, and to sell these bonds to Wall Street, as well as to get a TIFIA loan. To achieve the BBB- rating, we need to get at least a 2 times debt service coverage ratio, which means for every $1 of debt, we need to get at least $2 of revenue. And for us to achieve that, we actually need to receive 60% of the revenues up front. So as we showed you earlier, there's $5.3 billion, but our Mexican partners have agreed to give us 60% of the cash flows initially, as opposed to 50-50, knowing that we have a greater portion that we have to spend to get our facility up and running. And they also realize that this is a great asset for not just, Mexico and the US, but really for the entire region. And so they've been really great team players with us. And again, they've accepted to give us 60% of the money up front. You can see from the blue line that's closer to the 2 times coverage that we would need to sell these bonds, as opposed to if we were to get the 50%, that would be kind of falling below. So again, this slide over here basically shows, after the gross toll revenues is $5.3 billion. There's usually some leakage that happens in toll facilities, as well as some of the operating costs that we have to pay for, not the manpower, but some of the tolling facilities. We expect to get $4.7 billion over through 2062. Half will go to Mexico, half will go to the US, but initially we'll get more of the money, the 60%, and then 10% will flow through to Mexico over time. So this is kind of a flow chart that just shows kind of the modified 50% split. The toll revenues come in, some leakage, the tolling overnet costs. Then we get the net tolling revenues. Initially, Sandag will get 60% of the revenues. And then once we pay our senior and subordinate lien, we make sure our reserve funds are fully funded. And then we have the reserve and renewal and replacement costs. and then there'll be some residual revenues. Just now, as it stands, the financial performance show that after we pay the debt, there's approximately $1 billion that will remain to the agency that we can spend within the corridor for further improvements. Right now we start off with a 5x5 facility, and Mario said it's a really big area of land that we have that we could accommodate growing the facility, and so we have the residual revenues to do that. So, within the next month, we'll be engaging the 3 rating agencies of Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. As we noted previously, we need to get at least 2 investment grades, BBB-. To remind you, when we actually purchased the SR-125, they were BBB- credit, and over the last 10 years of Sandag running the facility, we've had an upgrade 4 times, now we're an A+. So, we start fairly low, and as the revenues ramp up, we hope to, just like the SR-125 facility, increase our ratings to at least the A category, but at least if we can start from a BBB-, we know that we'll be able to secure bonds from Wall Street, and also obviously our TIFIA loan. Now, there's a lot of legal documents on the right, and as Hassan said, Betsy and our legal team have been working really hard with our bond counsel, our disclosure counsel, our Mexican kind of parts, and so hopefully we're kind of working on a parallel with the legal team. The way that we have our schedule right now, we anticipate that we'll be able to get a TIFIA loan early next year. With that, we'll be going to Wall Street probably about a year from now. Again, we working parallel with Betsy and her team. All these documents that you see on the right side, I'm not going to read all of them, but these are agreements that we're working on, and we will need these agreements to be set before we'll get any kind of firm commitment from the TIFIA or bonding community. But we're fairly confident where we are today that we should be able to, by next year this time, have the financing set in place. So again, this has been a long time coming. We are down the final stretch. And the Otay Mesa East is actually one of our priority projects that we have in our budget that's coming to the board this next month. In fact, it's the priority project. And so with the team that we have working on this endeavor, I'm very confident that we'll be able to get the financing. So with that, now I'll have, I'm sure, questions later, but for now, I just want to turn it over to Maria, who will describe the potential delivery methods for this facility.
Thank you, Andre. So as Andre was explaining, there are 3 major areas we're working on right now. There is the agreement and negotiations with the federal and Mexican government. There is the financial effort, and then there is the delivery of the project. So today I want to walk you through the 3 delivery methods, and we assemble a team to really examine and analyze what is the best fit for our project. Enabling legislation, Senate Bill 1486, allows us to use alternative delivery methods. So we looked and we started with the standard traditional delivery method, which is design, bid, build. That means you usually contract the design. Under one contract, you complete all of the design before you move to the next phase, which is the construction. So there are 2 procurement processes, one for the design. Once it's completed, then you move into the procurement of the construction. That's the longest delivery path. It doesn't allow for any overlap. And looking at that, it would mean that if we go in the next few months and put out a design procurement, we wouldn't have a team on board until January 2023 to start the design. And then once the design is complete, we would have to do another procurement for the construction, and the construction will not be able to start until September 2024. And how Hassan put it, we're in a hurry. We're trying to get this done as soon as possible, and we want to have a facility open by that date, September 2024. So this really didn't work for us. So next we decided to look at design sequencing. We did use design sequencing in our first phase of the project, the SR11 segment 1, and it worked very well because at the time we did not have all of the right of way. So we decided to segment the roadway in different packages depending on the parcels we had available. So that worked really well. We were able to put out the construction as needed when we had the parcel under possession. Unfortunately, for a vertical facility, it doesn't work very well. It's limiting because when the contractor gets the award, they have to determine the cost up front. And it's really hard on a vertical facility because if you haven't designed the building, it's hard to know if it's going to be 3-story high, is it going to be concrete steel, is it going to have hardwood floors? So it's really hard for the contractor to bid and put a final cost at award when they don't have the information. It's a little bit easier when you're looking at a roadway facility, you can estimate those amounts in advance. So we decided this didn't really fit our project because the port of entry has multiple parking structures, buildings, and also the CBF had the same issue. So then we looked at design build. This delivery method allows to do one procurement process and get a team of a designer, an architect, and a contractor at the same time. Has a lot of advantages, not only decreasing the procurement process time, but also allowing the design team and the construction team to work together on issues as they come and kind of both looking at risks from the same perspective. It also allows you to do design and construction at the same time. So for example, you could start designing the foundation of the buildings and you could put out that piece of work first and start constructing it. So it really decreases the time in procurement and it decreases the overall time length for design and construction. Under this methodology, if we were to go out in the next couple of months with an RFP, we would be able to have a contractor and designer on board February 2023, maybe March, and then project start construction of some of the elements by June 2023. So the team is finalizing the report with these findings, and in the next few weeks, we'll come back here to TC and Borders to do that recommendation on the delivery and implementing design build. So what's next for the project overall? Andre and his team will finalize the financial strategy. We're putting out the site preparation, so the advertisement is out. We'll get bids next month, and we'll be able to break ground at the beginning of the summer, probably at the end of June. We'll continue working on the understandings with Mexico and the US federal partners. And we'll work on one specific item that is important for the project is the conveyance of the port of entry. Once we construct it, we'll convey it to the federal government. Here you can see the schedule laid out, site prep starting in June. We'll complete the utilities and we'll complete the site prep by June 2023. In the meantime, we're working on that request for qualifications package. We're working on the RFP package. We will try to have the proposals in by early next year so that we can finally open the facility in September 2024. That's our aggressive schedule. We'll do everything we can to try to meet it. That really concludes the presentation.
I'm going to close with, a couple of takeaways, because I think as the governing body, we gave you a lot of information. It's overwhelming, and we're really open for any questions. But I think I will leave it with 3 big takeaways. It's a very complex project with a lot of complex decisions, and we're going to be looking at the different committees and the board of directors to make decisions on those complex decisions of agreements and next steps, like Maria's mentioning. In the third takeaway is the Mexican government has made their policy decision to move forward with this project. President Lopez Obrador has personally named this project one of his highest priorities, and the Mexican military has taken it over. From our side, I think we've done, as you can see, the team, our management team, Hassan, Gustavo, have pushed the envelope substantially. The rubber is meeting the road on that policy decision in Washington. They're helping us, we're moving the needle, but I think this is the time where all of us and all of you who have the decision and the power of engagement are going to be very helpful. One, helping us with the policy decisions that are required here at the committees and the board of directors, but as well as that final policy decision in Washington to move forward with what Hassan said, the staffing and the basically the decision that comes from pretty much the White House and Office of Budget Management to say, let's get it done. I will conclude our presentation with those thoughts, and we're open for any questions on all the information that we gave.
Before the question, and Maria mentioned this, there is very few examples where the locals will do a facility and convey it to the federal government. Here we are doing $1 billion project. When it's done, we're saying, federal government, here it is, free and clear. Do whatever you think needed. That's why when we talk about staffing, if somebody asks you, why should the federal government should do that? Because they're getting a state-of-the-art facility after we're done with that.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for the great work. I mean, one of the reasons why we had this joint meeting today, and it was so important because both the Transportation Committee and the Borders Committee do have a really important role to play in this discussion. And Transportation Committee, has a delegated role to make sure that we have a policy oversight over transportation projects. And then the Border Committee is going to be able to include recommendations for border infrastructure as well, including the finance strategies as well. So it was a very thorough process, and I'll make some comments in a minute, but let me go ahead and see if there's any public comments at the moment.
I have a question when you're ready.
Yes, first let me go to public comments, and then we're going to go to committee members.
Thank you, Chair. We do have one in-person public comment. Dr. Tim Bilash, if you'd like to go ahead and step up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Yes.
Good morning again. Thank you for taking the public comments. Transportation is far outside my own expertise, so I make these comments. Please accept it in that context. Robert Frost had a poem that said, "Good fences make good neighbors." And I'd like to make a comment towards the cultural aspects of cross-border. There's a lot of contention and difficulties in dealing with this, other aspects of commercial and personal crossing, opinions about that. And so I'd like to make a comment about this international border. At an airport, which is within a country, very often within a city or a sovereign county, sometimes they have a duty-free area, which is not in the state or the country, but it's kind of this neutral zone territory. And when I was looking over the presentation material this week, I was just wondering, we seem to have this idea of a sharp dividing line between countries. And these comments may not be appropriate to this particular facility. It seems like it's oriented towards vehicle and commercial traffic, but there's also the issue of individual crossings, which probably will enter at some point into this. And so is there some idea, this silly idea of a nation-free area within the crossing, which is neither countries, which is a place where people maybe for commercial advantage or cultural interchange, where you wouldn't have to be identified in one or the other? I'm certainly not even an expert on international relationships or legalities, but I wanted to raise that issue because it came to my mind. It might improve border security to provide a better place. There are people who seek asylum because of their own circumstance, and whether we can calm down some of the inhuman conflicts that appear at the borders. Thank you.
Thank you, and Chair, that does conclude the public comments on this item.
Thank you so much. Before I move over to comments from our committee members, I just want to say that this is such an important project for all of us, and I am really proud that this particular project is actually a project that is in the heart of District 1, which is the unincorporated area in my district. And so for me, I think that it's not just that it's in District 1, but it really is going to be so critical and important for the region and for the state of California as a whole. And so the investment to our region for economic prosperity, I think, is significant, and it's not just only going to reduce border wait time for individuals and goods, but I also think, for me, I also look at it as a member of CARB and a chair of APCD. This is going to really be huge for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and particularly for our border communities. I do want to say that I'm absolutely committed to continue advocating at the federal level. And I do want to mention that for the County of San Diego, this is one of our priorities as part of our legislative packet. And so we have already sent all of our requests to both U.S. Senator Feinstein and Padilla, and have been very vocal with the administration to ensure that they understand how important this is, including the component of the staffing. So I just want to make sure that all of you are aware that for us, it is a priority for the county. And so let me go ahead and turn it over to Councilmember Vivian Moreno, and then I'll open it up for the rest of the members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation and for all your hard work. For those of you who don't know, I'm a District 8 representative to the city of San Diego, which is right next door. So it's very exciting to see the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry project moving in the right direction. The completion of this project will have a huge impact in our region, from reducing congestion and environmental impacts to bolstering binational trade. This project is a game changer. And as we continue moving forward, I think it's important for me to state that this item needs to be heard at the Borders Committee when it moves to the next step. It must be heard at the next Borders Committee, as they are the entity that we have advising on our border region in Sandag. So I look forward to seeing this item back at Borders in the near future. For the financial strategy, specifically for the Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act loan, can you speak more about this loan?
Sure. So the TIFIA office is basically the innovation. Department of Transportation gives loans to agencies such as ours for innovative projects such as this one, and they give the loans at a very reasonable rate. So in other words, it's tied to the 30-year Treasury plus one. For the Midcoast project, we initially had a 2.71%. Recently, a year and a half ago, when the Treasury rates fell, we refinanced and got a rate of 1.71%. Today, the Treasury is around 2.80. Now, we know that the Federal Reserve is starting to aggressively increase interest rates, so I'm not sure where rates will be in a year from now when we lock the rate, but I would assume somewhere in the 3% range, which is really a good rate. We expect, for example, the loan that we get from Wall Street will be in approximately the 5% range. So you can see that, 200 basis points lower in today's market. And so hopefully we'll be, in a year from now, it won't be too significantly higher. But again, the TIFIA loan is really good for us for this project because of the flexibility that it has. Once the project is complete, you don't have to make principal payments for the first 5 years. And also they let you kind of structure the debt, which is most closely resembles how your revenue is coming in. So it's a very beneficial loan, and something that, like I mentioned, we've actually put in for a letter of interest. We've had several conversations with the TIFIA office, and they're fairly excited about this loan coming through as well.
How much is available each year? And when is that application? When do we need to apply?
So we applied already, I'd say 4 months ago or so. We made the formal application to the TIFIA office. Now, the one downside, negative maybe, is that it does take a while, but we, based on the timeline that we are in right now, with about a year away from actually maybe breaking ground, we're in a good sweet spot with the TIFIA office.
Is there a cap?
You know, the cap is based on the percentage of federal funds that are on the project versus the amount of local. So yes, there is a cap to each time that you're able to get a TIFIA loan, but we try to maximize the amount that we are able to get in the TIFIA loan based on the fact that is the cheapest form of financing.
Wonderful, Andre. That's why we have you. Thank you for that.
So just to add, Councilman Moreno, so this account, the TIFIA, the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, is actually had more money than the need in the last couple of years.
Awesome.
For us, so just to emphasize the importance of what Supervisor Vargas alluded to about the federal government, we can apply for the loan, and which we did. Now we're going through the credit processes, but we could not withdraw money from the loan unless staffing is taken care of, unless there is a commitment that this facility will be staffed. That's why it is so critical to get this in the federal budget, either in 23 or 24.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for those answers. And also now putting on my MTS hat, is it too early to talk about the transportation facility? You guys mentioned a transportation facility eventually at this location. And I think as Tijuana continues to grow out east, it's more and more relevant for us to have more transportation facilities on the east side. I may be ahead I'm way ahead.
No,
Okay.
no, you're not. The project was cleared environmentally with a transit station footprint there. So Sharon has her property secured. It's owned by the state, but we would be transferring it to MTS when the appropriate time comes. Now, being that this is a greenfield project, also up to a point on the Mexican side, at opening day, we will have very limited pedestrian crossings. And I say limited, that it's only those who are on the trucks who have to get off and clear, or buses. So when the pedestrian facility crossing is pursued, because there are companion transportation facilities that can lead to the port of entry, that's when I think it's the appropriate time to start pursuing the transit station. But the properties there, the location, in the connection with the roadways, we've done it in conjunction with the county master plan and bike plan that they have. So it's all connecting, but the timing, right? That being that it's a greenfield project, we cannot just plug in a transit station that won't have any need or won't have any demand. So it's just figuring out that sweet spot and the timing perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you for that answer. We are very excited for that transportation facility. And as was mentioned, I think it's very important for us to focus on the staffing. The money is very important, but if we don't have the staffing for our, how we say, our guys and girls in blue, then we're going to fall short. And having met with the Port Commissioner a few months ago, he did express the fact that there's over 100 staff right now. They're short 100 staff at San Isidro, Calexico, and Otay Mesa proper. So our request for DC should definitely be about staffing. But as I mentioned, the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry is a catalytic project for our region on both sides of the border. And I can't stress how important the border is for commerce. Over $50 billion of commerce goes through Otay Mesa right now, you guys, and we have 4,500 trucks going on an agricultural road. City of San Diego Agricultural Road. So you know where I stand, Mario. I'm always happy to see you continue to be, and my colleague will tell you, I always have my Otay Mesa moments on council and let the council know how important this project is for our region. So congratulations to Caltrans, Mario Orso, thank you so much. And Sandag, Mr. Andre, I'm going to butcher your name, Dujan, perfect. And Maria Rodriguez Molina, thank you so much for this update. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to commend staff. You know, politics is about tipping points, recognizing that we have a window of opportunity and we have to move quickly. I truly appreciate, so thank you for doing that. I do have a couple questions that I didn't think of when you came and spoke with me. And by the way, thank you for that briefing. It was excellent. But my constituents have asked me, and I don't know how to answer. One is with the funding tied directly to the fees going across, if we go through another pandemic and we have a shutdown, is there room for us to stay the payments, or how would that work? How would we address that?
So let me address that, Supervisor. So just like SR 125, when we had the pandemic, we lost 50% of the traffic. Fortunately, we have enough revenues coming in, even with the 50%, that we could cover our debt service. But if we didn't, we have what you call a debt service reserve fund, which we have to have at least 1 year of debt service set aside. And then on top of that, we have 2 years of operating and maintenance set aside for the SR 125. So when we initially do the financing, some of the proceeds will go towards setting up a debt service reserve fund, as well as an operating reserve fund. So generally, you're hoping that you have at least 1 year's worth. Now, if a pandemic or something lasts longer than that, investors are basically taking the risk of that. So the good news for this is SANDAG funds are not put at risk. Investors who are going to get the interest return on their monies for investing in this facility have to take that into consideration. And certainly when we do the official statement, that'll be one of the risk factors. And having just gone through a pandemic, I'm sure that's going to be pretty extensive.
So it'll be reflected in the funding source. So, okay, thank you for that.
Supervisor, just to add, I think if you take this pandemic as an example, the commercial traffic went up. So even, God forbid, in another pandemic, we expect at least the commercial side. This facility is designed 5 by 5, 5 for passenger, 5 for, so the commercial will probably continue to be given our.
That's an excellent point. What I was concerned about is we saw in Canada, they shut down their border entirely. So I wasn't worried about us being productive. I wasn't worried about you being on top of it. I was worried about Mexico shutting down their side, and then all the trucks end up in Mexico, and what do we do? So, but I certainly appreciate it, and you know, if investors know what the risk is, the rate will reflect it, and we can move forward. The second question I had that was brought to my attention is the Century Lane. Are we competing with the Century Lane, or will we have a Century Lane over on that side? You know, the promotion of the Century Lane is that speeds up getting through the border because you're pre-approved and you get to move quickly. You just show your card and drive on through. So how are we competing with that? And I'm sure you, in your calculations of funding, have calculated it, because initially, I think the Century mode is fairly expensive at just under $250, but the renewals are significantly lower. And if I'm going through at the peak rate of $20 or $30, I only need to go through five or six times, and all of a sudden the Century is very affordable. So I want to augment that. You know, is it possible for us to have this speeded up process in addition to the Century and have a Century Lane there? Or what provisions have you considered, and how will that work?
Thank you for the question. Excellent question, because that took a long time for us, a lot of internal dialogue of how the 3 different programs for crossing were going to be dealt with. First of all, I'm going to start with the traffic and revenue model that Andre mentioned that was developed, and is the basis for the numbers. Extremely conservative model, but it tries to replicate reality based on all the improvements that are even happening right now at the border in the road networks. So that included considering the Century program, and as well as the regular and the Ready program in passenger vehicles. Trucks have other programs also. Originally, we thought that we were not going to be providing Century at this facility because Century guarantees 15-minute crossings, or tries to guarantee 15-minute crossings. In order for us to, we're striving for a 20-minute guarantee, 20 to 30 minutes in this facility. In order for us to be able to treat the border as a system, we have developed, and we're in the process of eventually publicizing a border wait time system that's going to allow us to calculate variable tolls. And we are seeing that the Sentry program is reaching 45 minutes of wait or even longer. So it may end up being that the Sentry program, it may also be a client of this facility. So we did take it in consideration to specifically answer your question. We are not competing with them because the universe of crossings are so humongous just on the non-Sentry programs that we will be providing a service. But I think now we're seeing that even the Sentry program will be a client here. The booths are designed in such a way that they can accept any of the 3 programs at the crossings. So based on how the demand is at opening day at the other border crossings, we will be able to adjust accordingly. So we did consider that. And the traffic and revenue study is very conservative. So I think that there's even going to be more opportunities for us to capture those clients from that program.
Thank you very much. If I inferred that you didn't consider it, that was not my intention. I knew you considered it. I just wanted to find out what the answer was so I could convey it. But
if I may add, not everybody qualifies for Sentry. So we're providing a service of a faster process to the people that cannot qualify for Sentry or they're not interested in applying for Sentry. Otherwise, everybody would be applying for Sentry now, right?
Right, but because our goals are so stellar, I was wondering if there's any chance that we could partner with them. It sounds like you're already way ahead of me as I anticipated. The only other thing I'd like to share is I really appreciate your efforts on this. In my district, many of the people that work in my district live in Tijuana because there's a lack of affordable housing in San Diego County. And I know it's not just true to my district, other districts have to suffer through that as well, where people have to make these commutes. So anything we can do to expedite it so they're not late for work, and we give them a platform to hopefully in the future, as we build homes, move home to the United States, that would be great. So thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Anderson, for that wonderful question about Sentry. I just spent 45 minutes in the San Ysidro line crossing, and so obviously this border morphing from one site to the next as we learn and as we go, as we grow, I think is a great approach, and I'm glad Mario's and his team are as flexible as they are. First, I want to thank Sandag staff, particularly Hector Venegas and the other folks on the transportation side that have brought us together as 2 jurisdictional groups on this particularly important project, hugely important project. In fact, to use Mario's word, it's humongous, which is, it really is. It's game changer, as Councilman Moreno said. And I'm super excited. And Andre, I got to say, having sat through several of your bond presentations, this was the most interesting because I understood it. But my specific question for you is, on your slide about the 2 times ratio, your line stays below that 2 times line for quite a while before it gets above it. So talk about the plan to sort of mitigate that risk. I was nervous when you used the BBB minus number as what we're going for. That seems kind of low, but then again, that was my UCLA grade point average when I graduated. So it works. It will work, I promise.
That's a compliment, Andre, by the way.
It absolutely is. So that 2% making up that gap is the question for you. And then Mario, as somebody who crosses the border about once a month, and I use OTI quite regularly, I know that you've talked a lot with your Mexican counterparts about funding. You described this morning that the Army is taking over the process of what happens on the Mexican side there, and seeing the tremendous progress that the Army made on the airport outside of Mexico in a very quick manner. And as I was reminded by my colleague here, the progress on Chaparral, when it came time to do that, was significantly it beat what we could have done on this side for various regulatory reasons and other reasons. But I haven't really seen a bulldozer. I haven't seen anything on the Mexican side, and all the times I cross, I always take a peek. Can you give us any idea in your discussions with the Mexican side when we'll actually see some physical progress on that? So that one's for you, Mario, and then the gap on the 2% for you, Andre. Thank you.
Sure, so I'll take the first question. The 2% is the goal that we're trying to reach. The 1.85 is ultimately, I think, where we land. And I think even with the 1.85, the rating agencies have told us that we'll be able to get to a BBB minus. But again, we're trying to give ourselves a little bit more breathing room. We don't want to be right on the 185. So our goal is to get to 2%, but even at the 185, we're good. However, if we're to get only the 50%, we fall below the 185. And at that point, we're fairly sure that we would not be able to get the ratings that we needed to. So that's why that additional 10% that we're able to get from the Mexico side initially is really getting us above that threshold that we need to get to.
And a quick follow-up on interest rates. We all feel that those are going up. Is there any way for us to hedge our bet or move more quickly on financing, since we're going to dig a shovel on June of 2022 for this thing? Is there any way to move financing a little quicker?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, unfortunately, the rates have really moved from January through this last 3 months, more than we've ever seen, actually. The answer is yes, you could hedge your interest rates, but that costs you quite a bit of money to do it.
Okay.
And I think as a governmental agency, our goal is not necessarily to play in the financial markets, but to deliver projects. So I would say I'd be more comfortable just to wait to see where rates are. And I think the rates have gone up so aggressively, so fast, that generally Wall Street kind of corrects itself. So hopefully within a year from now, things will be a little more normalized. That's what we're hoping anyway.
Okay, forgive my choice of words. I wasn't advocating a risky financial strategy. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Regarding Mexico, we have gotten several notices from the Mexican government. One, that they're 90% complete with the right-of-way acquisition. Second is that they have now executed a contract with their federal energy commission, or the power company that's also owned by the government, to relocate the power towers, as well as agreements to relocate a major gas line that Sempra owns, that we're also relocating or adjusting the elevation. I think that you're going to see in a very short time frame some movement of equipment there. They were taking care of the legalities to start clearing. The state of Baja has now started getting involved in the negotiations for relocations of some of the property owners, offering alternate properties to relocate people. So there has been a substantial amount of advancement, but you haven't seen the bulldozers. I think you're going to start seeing them within the next 6 months, some huge amount of movement. And that's my expectation.
Okay, thank you. And actually genius on the Mexican side for using the power tower right of way for the progress on this, because it's less disruptive to the existing infrastructure. Thank you very much for your report, and keep up the good work.
Okay, yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This is an extraordinary project. Growing up here in North County, San Diego, and having made so many trips across the border, I'm curious about, it's a smaller percentage of the traffic that we're going to capture, but what does that reflect on the San Ysidro side? As far as decreasing the wait times to cross, because it's still going to be a majority of the individuals utilizing, these other ports of entry. So I'm just curious of, a 10% reduction would be, an estimate of how much time is reduced to cross the border.
I know it seems like a small amount capture rate, but it does have a lot of impact. It's so sensitive to processing rates, to length of the queue, but we're seeing in the models that just taking that 10% capture, it can reduce wait times by 40% at San Ysidro and Otay Mesa.
Yeah, so for someone who crosses on a regular basis, and depending on the day, it could be like a 3 to 4 to 5 hour wait. So a reduction of 40% is significant for those who aren't able to utilize, the toll road to go to this new facility. So that's huge. And what we have seen is how important, economic resiliency and prosperity is really the more frictionless we can create a system where people and goods and capital can travel without so much friction, then it creates a lot more economic resiliency. And then on the other side, being in a climate crisis, having cars idle for 3 to 5 hours is just not good for air quality, as Chair Vargas mentioned. So this is such a significant, even for the employees, right? Because we need to have this facility staffed. I have concern about, the employees that staff these facilities having to be in an area that is just has so much tailpipe emissions. So this is a significant step in the right direction. And thank you so much for the presentation. I look forward to seeing this come to fruition.
Thank you. Just a data point that's very interesting. Taking in consideration all the elements you just mentioned, air emissions, value of time, economics, national security, as we're pursuing grants that Andre mentioned, federal and state grants, we have to do what's called a cost-benefit analysis. And we've done 2 recently. One came at a 10-to-1 benefit, and the other one at a 16-to-1 benefit. In a traditional infrastructure project, if you get a 1-to-1 benefit, you're pretty good. Now imagining getting a 10-to-1 benefit, that's humongous. So that puts in data points what you just mentioned.
That's incredible. It really is.
Thank you so much. I will add, though, that I really appreciate that you're making those comments, particularly, I think, because when people think about having conversations about the border, it kind of falls on either the elected officials who represent the border region and or many of us who have, traditionally lived on the border region. But it's such an important conversation because of our binational workforce and who we are as a region as a whole. I will say that the other piece to this is that, and this is not an advocacy piece, but we do have to continue to advocate for additional funding for staff on the San Isidro side, because that is the other piece that's missing, in addition to the work that we're doing here. And I'm not gonna stray away from it because we have to focus on East Otay Mesa today, but it's really important, and I know that we are all doing that work together because it does impact our students and our communities and our families as well, and it's extremely important as we're moving forward. So I appreciate your comments. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our fearless leader, Hassan, to give his update.
Thank you, Supervisor. Good morning, committee members. I'm going to update you on a few things first, and then I'll get into the priorities. First, before I get into the projects, I wanted to touch base on one issue that we presented to our board last month, and that is on State Route 125. As you know, we collect tolls. There is 42 stations points where we collect tolls. 5 of those stations were stopped working. Once we discovered them, it was a few months. Together with our independent performance auditors, we went into finding out what's going on, how much revenue did we lose. We presented the report to the audit committee. Chair Zito here, I think, remember this. I will be talking to the board next week. The independent performance auditors management have concluded the investigation. We believe the loss of revenue is 1.79. I reported to the board last time 1.5 to 2 million. It's now 1.79 million. To make sure that this never happens again, first of all, we made some personnel decisions and change personnel at the top. Right now, I'm happy to tell you that your CFO, Andre Dujan, is the acting director for the toll facility. He actually divided himself between this office and the toll facilities building. While Andre is acting, we're looking at ways to bring in management, one to a director, and 2 to make sure we look at all the operational aspects of the toll agency. We are going through a growing pain, like I say. We need a lot of technological upgrades that we are starting to do. Our equipment is old, and we hope in the next year or two to do that. This is, I categorize this as unintentional human error, but this shouldn't happen. And this agency about accountability and credibility, and therefore, yes, we had an intentional human error. Yes, the loss of revenue was 1.79 million, but that actually gonna make sure that this never happens again, and we have the state-of-the-art equipment to deal with it. Again, I will be reporting to the board next week. I also want you to know that are continuing to move quickly to update our policies to implement the recommendation from the recent audit on P cards. That audit went to the audit committee. We talked to the board about it, and we're planning to come to the board. So as I said, when I first presented this to the board, we had accepted all the findings from the auditor. You know, usually management has a chance to respond. We said we accept because we're all for more policies and more controls. Let me just say that you might hear it in the press lately. The expenses in question were for business purposes to advance SANDAG's priorities, projects and programs. That included meeting with people over meals, that also including purchasing meal for staff during COVID with limited option to dine out. We understand the perception, it's a fair game. But the bottom line is this is about controls and policies. And this is what we need to fix, this is what we commit to fix. This agency going through growing pain, we'll make sure it does. For those who want to give political speeches about an issue, you know, I'm a fair game, but the agency is not. This agency truly is trying to earn the trust of the public, trying to build the infrastructure projects of the future. And it's unfortunate that some people will use anything for political gains. That does not change the fact that we have not had the right policies and controls in place, and that we will take full responsibility for. Since this audit, while working with our independent auditor to go to the board, the chair of the audit committee knows that already, we reduced the credit cards from 13 to 6. We ceased to use the credit card for any meals until new policies are in place, and our board will be hearing about these policies. So I just want you to know, you hear it in the press, you hear it from me. This is legitimate business reason, but there is lack of policies and control that we should accept, take responsibility for. I'm also proud to say that we joined today by Supervisor Vargas, Vice Chair Vivian Moreno, the chair of the Equity Working Group, to celebrate something I personally feel honored to be part of. The reason I feel honored is equity statement is a good thing, but deeds are important. The leadership showed today that we mean what we say, and so I'm really proud of that. And you heard about Otay Mesa too. We had also the Central Mobility Hub that you heard probably in the news about, that we're ready to connect our airport to rail. And these are the kind of things that I want people in San Diego to focus on. And I want to assure you again that this agency is about accountability and credibility. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hassan. We will now take in-person or virtual comments. Francesca, do we have any submitted speaker slips or hand raised on Zoom?
We do not have any public comments on this item.
All right, any member comments? Seeing none, that officially concludes the joint meeting portion of the agenda. So thank you so much to all of the members of the Financial Committee. We are now going to take the remaining items of the Transportation Committee only, but the Borders Committee members, you're welcome to stay if you want and join us in the discussion. We're going to move over to the Transportation Committee only portion and starting first with the consent agenda. If a member would like to pull an item of the consent agenda, or if you have questions or comments on any item, please let me know at this time. Yes. Yeah. What I?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the RTIP amendment number 10, and I'm seeing two things that got my attention. Grouped projects for safety improvements, as well as group projects for bridge rehabilitation and reconstruction. I know that Gustavo, who's been a champion for the suicide barrier, would tell me if there was some of this 23 million that's getting reallocated to those projects was devoted to the suicide barrier, but he didn't, so it isn't. And as the project has become more extensive in terms of just the barrier, it's now added some maintenance and inspection improvements that are necessary to fulfill the project. I believe that the colors of money that this project qualifies for has increased. And so it would make me and my community significantly happier to see RTIP amendment number 11 include some money directed towards the design phase or whatever the proper funding mechanism is for that. I know that you had mentioned earlier that there's a memorial for the more than 100 people who've been killed as Caltrans employees. I don't think there's another annual memorial for the more than 400 folks who've taken their lives off this public right of way. And I think we as policymakers and your organization have worked diligently. Mario, you've been a champion for this. So my plea as I move the consent agenda is that RTIP amendment number 11 includes some dedicated money for the suicide barrier project. And I'd like to salute Councilmember Campillo for partnering with me on this project. Thank you. So motion made.
Chair, I'm sorry.
I am on the Transportation Committee, yeah, through MTS, yeah.
Do you mind if I just make a brief clarification?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Amendment 10 is a typical formal RTIP amendment. Amendment 11 is actually the amendment for the transit CIP, and that's part of amendment, or I believe it's item 6.
Yeah, I apologize. I guess a subsequent amendment would be a more appropriate way to say that. And Richard, but thank you for telling me that.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional?
I just want to note that I will be abstaining from consent item 4 as I was not present for the meeting minutes.
Got it. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair Vargas. Just want to thank my colleague from Coronado, Mr. Sankey, for really ringing the bell on the suicide barrier need. It was a conversation that he had with me about the importance of it many, many months ago when he gave me the idea that we ought to partner as 2 cities and as a region for this because it's long been needed. And as soon as I did that, Councilmember Sankey, the number of emails and phone calls and text messages I got that said, absolutely, no brainer, get this done, was extraordinary. So I want to thank you for your leadership in representing Coronado and for really leading the way on this. I'm happy to be your partner in this and just want everyone to know it was your idea.
Thank you. Just a few comments on item number 7. Item number 7 brings up the Blue Line and San Isidro Mobility Hub and also the Sandag Purple Line. And you don't have to answer these questions today, but I do. I would like to make sure, and I would like to hear from staff on what kind of community engagement is happening at the moment, and if it's not happening at the moment, what the outreach will be like for the San Isidro Mobility Hub. This is a project that the community is very excited about, and I want to make sure that we help out in any way we can. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the members? No. We do have, I think, one public member comment.
Thank you, Chair. We do have one member of the public who'd like to speak on this item. Catherine Rhodes, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, thank you. And thank you very much for talking about the suicide barriers and getting it funded. That's wonderful. That'd be great. And just my little comment here is, I'm not sure, but on item 6, pages 17 through 21, it says in thousands. And I think that in thousands from those pages maybe should be taken off. If someone could look into that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Chair. We actually had planned to use the voting machine for this, so
Fantastic. We get to use the rolling machine. So I have never used it, so why don't we go ahead and have someone remind us how to use it?
One is yes, two is no. One is yes, two is no. Just make sure this is.
One is yes and two is no.
Let me teach you how to use it. 1 is yes and 2 is no. How about
3
that?
is abstain.
It has your name, your seat on it on the top. You're so smart, huh? All right. Are we missing anyone?
And that item does pass with those members present.
Thank you so much. The next item on the agenda is item number 9, which is the fiscal year 2021 Transcendent Fiscal and Compliance Audits, Initial Findings and Recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Sunny House to begin this report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sunny House. I am the Chair of the Independent Taxpayers Oversight Committee for the Transnet, better known as ITALC. And we are here today to present to you the audit that we conduct for the various agencies that use transit funds. So the Transit Extension Ordinance requires us, as your ITALC for the transit program, to conduct an annual fiscal and compliance audit of all the transit-funded activities using the services of an independent fiscal auditor to ensure compliance with the voter-approved transit ordinance. The transit fiscal and audits have been conducted for the period of July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. And at our meeting of ITALC in March, we reviewed and accepted the auditor's summary report and the fiscal year 2021 draft audit report. However, at that point, we did not have, we were missing one city of Coronado, which has gone through some staff turnover and was not able to provide the audit. And on Wednesday, we did review that audit report result as well. So the draft audit basically now, the report that you have in front of you has the full audit report. And the reason that we're here is because per requirements of the ordinance, the ITALC should share the initial findings of the independent fiscal audit and its recommendation with you all, the Sandak Transportation Committee, 60 days before we release the audit results to the public and to the board. And this is to make sure that we resolve any inconsistencies and technical issues related to the ITALC draft report and recommendations. So once this review has taken place, the ITALC will make the final amendments if it deems appropriate and necessary, and it will then make the recommendations to adopt the report and then submit directly to the Sandak Board and Board of Directors and the public. So I'm joined here today by Kyle Haas of Davis Farr LLP, which is the firm that conducted the FY 2021 audit and on behalf of ITALC. So Kyle will share an overview of the initial findings and recommendations of the audit. At the end of the presentation, Kyle will turn it over to Sandak staff Marcos Pascual, who will then cover the next steps and the audit process and address any comments you may have. And of course, I will be here available as well to answer any questions. Go ahead, Kyle.
Thank you, Chair House. Okay, so would like to just go over the results here, beginning with the scope of the engagement. We as a firm met with the ITALC in July 2021 to discuss procedures to be performed for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2021. From October 2021 through January 2022, we performed the agreed upon procedures of the 24 Transnet recipient agencies. We presented the draft reports to ITALC in March of 2022. I would like to go over 7 major areas of review. Just briefly here, for expenditures, we did not note any issues or instances of non-compliance. We did, however, have one recommendation for the City of Coronado to improve their documentation for payroll charges by project. Moving on to maintenance of effort, 2 agencies did not meet their maintenance of effort requirements. Those would be the City of Del Mar and the City of San Marcos. In the prior year, we just had one such agency, which was the City of Poway. Every 3 years, we recalculate the new maintenance of effort requirements. Our report includes the new requirements for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2023 through June 30th, 2026. Next is the 30% SANDAG board policy rule, determined whether agencies maintained a balance of no more than 30% of their annual apportionments. All agencies were in compliance except for the cities of Lemon Grove and National City. Within the prior year, the city of Del Mar was not in compliance. Funding will be deferred until these cities are in compliance with that 30% rule. Next, for local street improvements, we calculated and ensured that at least 70% of revenues provided for local street and road purposes were used for congestion relief, and no more than 30% of those funds were used for maintenance. We did not note any exceptions within our agencies. Next, we tested indirect cost allocated to the projects. 11 agencies did allocate indirect costs. However, we did not note any exceptions as a result of our testing. The 6th item here, the RTCIP Regional Transportation Congestion Improvement Program. We tested exaction fees collected on new development. We did note that there were 4 exceptions where agencies did not collect the proper exaction fees for the current fiscal year or fiscal year 2021. The cities of El Cajon, Escondido, Lemon Grove, and Oceanside. In the prior year, the cities of Coronado, Lemon Grove, and National City were not in compliance with this requirement. Additionally, we tested expenditures of said exaction fees and did not note any exceptions for our expenditure testing. Finally, for the transit operator eligibility, we tested the increase in the total operating costs for bus and rail services to determine if it exceeded the increase in the consumer price index. The CPI increased 12.41%, and we found that the North County Transit District was not in compliance with the rail operator eligibility. Operating costs per revenue vehicle mile did increase by 20%, which exceeded that 12.41% we previously noted. So the results of our procedures and a detail of the findings are included within the individual draft reports, including management responses from the agencies to any of the findings that we did note within our reports. I will now turn the presentation over to Marcus for final comments.
Thank you, Kyle. Hello, members of the Transportation Committee. I'm Marcus Pasquale with the Finance Department, and I'll be going over the next steps regarding the Transnet fiscal and compliance audits. Per the ordinance, ITALC is required to have at least 60 days from today's Transportation Committee to accept the results. So the soonest that the ITALC can accept the final results of the audit is June 14th, which is the date we intend to bring the results to ITALC for approval. After ITALC approval, the results of the audit will be included in the ITALC's Transnet annual report scheduled to go to the Board of Directors meeting on June 24th. And that will conclude item 9. I will now turn it back over to Chair Vargas for questions and comments before proceeding to item 10.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments on this item.
Are there any member comments on this item? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Vargas. Thank you very much for the report, Ms. House, Mr. Haas, Mr. Pascual. Meeting many of the various requirements for various cities because of the differing economic circumstances across our region is obviously difficult to attain, and so it's understandable in this particular time how compliance has not been met by every city. I'm just wondering what's the accountability for not meeting those in a standard year when we don't have varying projections of tax revenue, ridership, spending, all the sorts of things. I feel like it's not infrequent that we see lack of compliance, and so I understand that sometimes that happens, but what happens when there isn't compliance in a normal year?
In a normal year, it's actually every year. We go off the ordinance, and the ordinance states and has they allow them to cure the findings, and part of that is for them to come in and explain their situation for that year, in which case, if the Board of Directors approves that reason why they're in non-compliance, then it will be removed as a finding from the fiscal year audits.
So what if the board doesn't accept that reasoning?
If the board were not to approve that, then it will be found as a finding on the audits. And the ordinance states the calculation in which the next year's revenues are reduced because of that finding. And I will go over that in the next item in more detail.
Okay, understandable. I know that I'm sure some years in the past, the city of San Diego fails to meet their compliance requirements. No, I'm not trying to call out any particular city. I'm just trying to make a sense of, it seems odd that compliance is literally a matter of, are we willing to vote yes to say you're in compliance, even if you really haven't met the goals, and that there's really no particular consequence for not meeting the goals. So I'm interested in having a further conversation offline about the ramifications for this. Obviously, I don't want any city to have to sacrifice funding from SANDAG because of particular circumstances. Not every city is very different, has different needs, different constituencies, and so it's reasonable to find that a failure to meet compliance in a particular year is an acceptable circumstance. It seems to me that the policy doesn't actually hold anybody accountable when it is a normal year, as I pointed out. But that would just be my comments, and this does not reflect on how I plan to vote on the next item either. Just wanted to make sure we had it on the record that it is a bit of a perverse set of compliance circumstances that we have here.
Thank you. Any other committee members? All right, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item. Item number 10 is the fiscal year 2021 Transcendent Extension Ordinance Funding Eligibility Requirement. Mr. Pascual.
Thank you. Part of the procedures are to ensure compliance of operator and local street and road recipients so that they continue receiving their annual allocation. We have 3 requests from NCTD Rail, San Marcos, and Del Mar. And joining me here today, should the committee have any questions, is Ewan Park Lynch, CFO from NCTD, and Marilyn Santos, Finance Officer from Del Mar. Unfortunately, San Marcos could not make it today, but I will be happy to forward any questions and comments to the appropriate representative of that city. So pertaining to NCTD's request, quoting off the ordinance, section 4C5 states that to maintain fund eligibility, total operating costs per revenue vehicle mile for bus and rail services from one fiscal year to the next may not exceed the consumer price index increase for San Diego County over the same period. This is an annual requirement, and as you can see in attachment 1 in the NCTD request section, CPI increased by 12.41%, while operating costs per revenue vehicle mile increased by 20. The CPI figure used is transportation specific and relates to San Diego County. Section 4C5 also states that if there were unusual circumstances in a given fiscal year, the operator may request the approval of the commission to calculate the requirement as an average over the previous 3 fiscal years, or to exclude from the calculation certain cost increases that were due to external events entirely beyond the operator's control. So from section 4C5, NCTD is requesting to recalculate their FY21 operating costs per revenue vehicle hour for rail services using a cost exclusion method, and to exclude approximately $3.8 million for contractual purchase transportation costs for rail services impacted by COVID-19, as described in detail in attachment 2. Approval of this request by the Board of Directors would enable compliance with this section of the ordinance, and NCTD would be eligible to receive all apportioned FY22 Transnet revenues. Should the board choose to not approve the request, then NCTD would remain in non-compliance for FY21 and would be eligible to receive FY22 Transnet revenues equal only to those received in FY21, adjusted for any increase in the transportation-specific CPI for San Diego County over the same period. I would also like to point out that since the CPI adjusted amounts received for FY21 are greater than projected revenues for FY22, NCTD will still be eligible for the full 2022 allocation. So that is concluding the operator eligibility requests. We also have 2 cities who have eligibility requests due to shortfalls in maintenance of effort. Section 8 of the ordinance states that to maintain fund eligibility, each local agency receiving revenues pursuant to Section 4D shall annually maintain as a minimum the same level of local discretionary funds expended for street and road purposes on average over the last 3 fiscal years completed prior to the operative date of this ordinance, with the level adjusted every 3 years. This is referred to as the maintenance of effort. And the purpose of this requirement is to ensure entities are supporting their local revenues with Transnet instead of using Transnet as a complete funding source. Section 8 also states that in the event that special circumstances prevent a local agency from meeting its maintenance of effort requirement, the local agency may request up to 3 additional fiscal years to fulfill its requirement. So in accordance with this part of the ordinance, that is what the city of Del Mar and San Marcos are requesting today, an additional 3 years to fulfill the shortfall in MOE requirements. Approval of these maintenance of effort requests by the Board of Directors would enable compliance with Section 8 of the ordinance, and the cities of Del Mar and San Marcos would be eligible to receive all apportioned FY 2022 Transnet revenues. Should the Board of Directors choose to not approve the request, then the cities would remain in non-compliance for FY21 and would be eligible to receive FY 2022 Transnet revenues less the shortfall of $257,000 for Del Mar and $589,000 for the city of San Marcos. I would also like to add for your consideration that these requests were presented to the ITALC at their March 9th meeting and recommended approval of this request. These types of approvals also have been approved in the past. So to restate our recommended action for item 10, the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend to the Board of Directors, acting as the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission, approve the requests. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have representatives from NCTD and Del Mar, should you have any questions. Thank you, Chair, and that concludes item 10.
Thank you, Mr. Pascual. We will now turn to public comment. Clerk?
Thank you, Vice Chair. We have no public comments on this item.
Very good. Do we have any comments, questions, and we will entertain a motion from our committee members? I'm seeing Councilmember Sankey.
Thank you very much. The level of granularity in this report is remarkable, and I apologize to staff for how many times they had to say Coronado, and I'll have a few words with my staff when I get back. But I do want to point out that MTS has some really interesting results in here, really good ones, frankly. We were found in compliance on the growth rate for the operating revenue vehicle hours. And when you look at the operating cost per revenue vehicle mile for rail service, we actually improved our metric by 2.21%. And I salute Sharon and MTS staff for handling this in a very pragmatic and effective way and being efficient with public money, and I think that's huge. That said, I would make the recommendation to approve or to recommend this on to the board for approval, the staff recommendation.
Very good. We have a motion for Councilmember Sankey. I see.
Happy to second it.
I have a second from Councilmember Moreno. Councilmember Contreras.
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to say on behalf of North County Transit District, fiscal year 2021 was a difficult year, in particular for the coaster. We had contractual obligations that don't allow us to come within the parameters set by this ordinance, but we look forward to the increase in ridership that we continue to see. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Any further comments from the committee? Oh, yes, Ms. Cooney.
Obviously, this doesn't impact us this time, but every year we come to this committee and we ask as transit operators that the SANDAG folks look at the Transcendent ordinance and suggest changes in this calculation. Our budgets are dictated to us frequently by outsiders. For instance, the minimum wage has gone up. That causes labor costs to go up for us as well. The cost of electricity and gas goes up, and we have no control over that. So pensions, the amount we have to pay to CalPERS, we have no control over that. So there's a lot of things in our budget that we really cannot control. And then ordinance defined what we have to do, how we have to keep our budgets tight, based on sort of a concept that, well, we should be able to stay within the CPI. Well, there's certain things out of our control. And so while it doesn't affect us this time, it has affected us in past years. And so unless this committee wants to take it up every year over and over, we probably need to get to the business of amending the ordinance to make it coincide with reality of how transportation is funded here. And so I have to give that, usually Matt Tucker is the one here giving this speech, but since he's not here, I thought I should say something.
Councilmember Sankey.
Thank you, Sharon. Having been on this committee for 4 years, I have gone through that experience over and over, and we always seem to have to find a way to say, yes, Councilmember Campillo, you identified that earlier in your remarks. And I would ask, if I could, John Kirk, to give a little outline on your interpretation of Sharon's remarks, very broadly, obviously, but we want to work in a real world. And what does that look like from your point of view?
Well, I think this really comes down to a policy decision for you to make a recommendation on, and ultimately the board, about whether the standards that are set forth in the ordinance are realistic and workable standards. As a factual matter, I agree that this is something that regularly comes to this committee and to the board, and we probably live more in the exception to the rule than in the rule. It regularly, I think you're asked to find that these exceptions apply, and it does probably exacerbate the problem of limited funding if you were to impose a remedy that is called for in the statute to further impact the funding of the statute or of the operators. That being said, the discretion of what that rule should look like ultimately rests with the board of directors. If they chose to keep the rule as it is or to modify that rule, both of those are within their discretion upon the normal Transnet amendment procedures.
So I'm recalling a couple of months back, we heard about some proposed ordinance amendments. Is there still a process going on right now to look at not this particular ordinance amendment, but other parts of the Transcendent ordinance at this moment? Is that still in play?
I know that remains something that the board is looking at. I can't speak to the timing of when that would come to the board, but it does remain a conversation.
If I was to see if I could get enough people on this board to say we'd like staff to actually give a broad brushstroke look at what it would look like to make this ordinance amendment, is that something that would be within A, our scope as a committee, and B, is something that's workable for staff?
Again, ultimately, it's the board of directors that has the discretion on that, and you control the agendizing through the chair and staff of this committee. I think that your input, the input of ITALC, and ultimately the input of the board would be the most important voices in deciding that.
So obviously, it's a bigger mushroom to slice, okay? So I would make a motion then for consideration that a future agenda for the Transportation Committee include an item on looking at this particular ordinance and what amendments to it might be made that would be helpful to the agency.
Councilmember Sankey, are you amending your original motion?
No. Well, let's approve the original. I'd like to bifurcate, so we'll approve and then we'll ask the other question.
Very good. Any further comments and questions as to the particular action which is before us on your screens for item 10, actions 1 and 2?
As a point of order, I just want to caution that what's agendized here today is consideration of one exception rather than the overall amendment and potential amendments to the ordinance. I think that your request to the chair to agendize something in the future would be in order, but taking a formal motion and vote to agendize a future item, I just give some caution on that. I think you could achieve the same end.
I appreciate your guidance and I will follow it. So as I said, my original motion stands and I'll withdraw the secondary motion that I made.
Very good. Any further comments? Hearing none, we have a motion from Councilmember Sankey, a second from Councilmember Moreno. Clerk, the roll.
Thank you, Chair. If you could all use the voting clickers to put in your vote. As a reminder, 1 is yes and 2 is no, 3 is abstain.
1.
And that item does pass unanimously with those members present.
Thank you,
And
Clerk.
so I would just follow up that through the chair, I would make a request that we look at that in a future agenda item.
I will absolutely work with Chair Vargas to make sure we agendize that.
Thank you, John.
And thank you for the suggestion as well on the particularities of the protocol. Moving on to item number 11, the revised fiscal year 2022 apportionment and fiscal 23 Transnet program and transit-related revenues. I'll now call on Mr. Jim Miller to begin his report.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. My name is Jim Miller. I'm a senior economist here at Sandag, and I'm just going to give you a little update on economic conditions. And the headline is that COVID has been driving our economy for a couple of years now, and we expect it to kind of take a back seat in the coming months to inflation fears driven a lot by the war in Ukraine. Real GDP growth for 2021 was 5.7%, which was a healthy rebound from a COVID-related dip in 2020 of 3.4%. And the Philadelphia Fed surveys professional forecasters every quarter, and they've come up with a 3.7% expected increase in GDP for 2022. The labor market, as you all know, saw a significant upheaval during COVID. Unemployment peaked at about 16% in April of 2020, and it's now down to 3.6% nationally and about 4.7% here in San Diego, and seems to be trending in the right direction because businesses have record amounts of job openings and have seen record amounts of resignations as employees have found better opportunities elsewhere. We've also seen pretty substantial increases in wages, especially for lower income earners, which is a very good sign. So if the economy is growing robustly and everyone who wants a job has one, why is everyone so miserable? Well, the answer is inflation. CPI prices rose 8.5% in the last 12 months, which is the biggest rise in 40 years. And 75% of that was really concentrated in things that we buy a lot of, like food and gasoline. Gasoline went up 50% in the last year, and it really has an outsized impact on people's perceptions of inflation. Even though we buy our household budgets, it's usually about 2 to 5% for gasoline. But, you know, the gasoline prices are advertised on every street corner, so it really has an outsized impact on how people feel about it. And we've also gotten accustomed over the last over 20 years to really low inflation of about 2%. In the 70s and early 80s, 8% inflation wouldn't have raised eyebrows, but as we've gotten accustomed to a more calm regime in the inflation world, we've really had our eyes open in the last few months, last 6 months really, of inflation. Housing costs have also risen about 33% in the last 2 years in San Diego, and that's really had a huge impact. Construction costs have risen about 10%, which can impact Sandag projects. And the Philadelphia Fed survey forecasts lingering inflation of 3.8% in 2022, which is still double what we've kind of grown accustomed to in the last 20 years. When you talk about the causes of inflation, for this particular inflationary wave we're seeing, it's caused by both supply and demand. On the supply side, you have kinks in every link of the supply chain. The world's factory, China, is still pursuing a zero COVID policy. And right now, 400 million Chinese are under lockdown. So that is impacting production. We're talking about shipping was thrown into turmoil during the pandemic. And right now, pre-pandemic, it cost about $1,500 to ship a container from China to the West Coast of the United States. In December, that number was $10,300. And right now, it's about $8,300. So it's still extremely expensive to ship. Once ships do get to the ports, particularly here on the West Coast, but also on the East Coast, they're finding they have to wait sometimes for weeks to get a slot to unload. The ports themselves are very congested. And once those goods leave the ports or try to leave the ports, we're seeing shortages in truckers and warehouse workers. That's really causing chaos, really, as you see up and down the supply chain. On the demand side, and I also want to mention that the war in Ukraine is also impacting supply, especially for energy. But we also expect to see some commodities like wheat and certain metals be impacted by that too. So this could have a longer term supply impact. On the demand side, what COVID did was it kind of shifted consumer behavior away from services to goods. You stopped getting haircuts and manicures for a while, and you started to buy goods for your home gym and your home office, those goods that have to be produced and shipped and distributed. You also saw generous federal income subsidies. The average family saw an increase of their income of about 15% in 2020 and 2021 from you had the federal stimulus, you had a Golden State stimulus with 2 waves. You also had income tax, child income tax credits that went through 2021. So really, you had consumers with money in their pockets and they went on a spending spree. But businesses did the same. Businesses recognized that their supply chains were under pressure, so they ordered a lot and they have been building inventories. So that's really created kind of a perfect storm on both supply have gone down, demand has gone up, and therefore prices rise. So the Federal Reserve is taking a pretty hawkish stand on inflation. As you probably all know, they've already rose interest rates once in March and are expected to do so several more times this year, perhaps as many as 300 basis points. And this is expected to kind of slow down demand a little and cool inflation, but it can also raise the cost of borrowing, including for SANDAG, although the finance department tells me we really don't have a lot of general exposure to increased interest rates. And in fact, we hold a lot of funds and reserves that could benefit from increased interest rates. COVID impacts have also been seen in SANDAG revenues like Transnet and TDA. After a flat FY 2020 and a 9% increase in 2021. So far in 2022, which started last July, we're seeing over a 20% increase, almost 25% increase in revenues. And that's really unprecedented. And despite the higher rates of inflation, we've done some calculations that show over 80% of that increase is really in real increased demand, not in inflation. So that is kind of extraordinary. And due to that spike, we are revising our 2022 forecast upward, anticipating a 20.9% jump in revenues for the fiscal year as a whole. For FY 2023, we're forecasting a much slower growth of 5%, with the expectation that buying patterns and inflation kind of revert to some sort of pre-pandemic normal. And this is an intentionally conservative forecast, although it still really kind of brings us back to essentially a pre-COVID level of revenue expectations in the long term. And to get to these forecasts, we employ a two-step forecasting method. The first couple of years, FY 2022 and 23, are basically based on the professional judgment of the SANDAG economic and finance teams. We look at the receipts that are coming in, the general economic conditions. We also look at forecasts that we get from our vendors, and we come up with numbers that we think are reasonable. In the longer term, we use a consensus of 3 outside forecasts that we buy. These forecasts include estimates of growth in personal per capita taxable retail sales, and we apply those to the Department of Finance, State Department of Finance population figures that we are required to use, and we come up with a long-term forecast that way. This forecast methodology we put through a SANDAG peer review process in January of 2021, where it's reviewed by unrelated SANDAG staff and also by outside experts. And they approve the methodology. We also take every forecast we do through the SANDAG QA/QC process to make sure that there are no errors in the spreadsheet model we use, and that the methodology is being followed appropriately. And I'll turn it over to Ariana now.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning to Vice Chairs Campillo and Moreno, and the rest of the SANDAG Transportation Committee members. So now that we've heard from Jim on his economic update, I'll share what this means for our local jurisdictions as well as our transit operators. But before I begin, I just want to remind everybody, and it's important to reiterate, that consistent with what we've shared at recent meetings on the long-term Transnet revenue forecast, while this revision reflects a significant short-term increase, we're still projecting that additional funding will be needed to complete our Transnet program. So we still need to continue working with all of you to continue pursuing funding for the region. But with that said, the reason that we are here today is to seek your recommendation to the board of an additional revision to both the Transnet and the Transportation Development Act related revenues for both fiscal years 22 and 23. And the reason this is important is because these estimates allow SANDAG and our partner agencies to plan for capital projects and to determine operating subsidies. There's 2 types of funding that we're covering as part of this report today. The first one being the Transportation Development Act, or TDA, which is the 0.25% share of the state sales tax. And then, of course, your Transnet sales tax measure funds. And we bring this item to you. We just came back in February and we're here back again. But the reason we come is because your action allows our transit agencies to plan for capital projects and determine operating subsidies, as I mentioned. And we work closely not only with our transit operators, but also with the San Diego County Auditor Controller. That's per statute, to confirm the proposed growth rate and for these funds, and then to apportion them to support local agency and transit operator planning and budgeting efforts. For this year's item, we are very happy to report that both fiscal years 22 and 23 Transnet and TDA revenues are higher than what the board approved, not only in February 2021, but also most recently February 22. And this additional revision means anticipated revenues for fiscal year 22 are now about $404 million for Transnet and about $190 million for TDA. With your recommendation, our transit operators would receive an additional $52 million in FY2 funding over the estimate approved by the board in February 2021. And member jurisdictions would receive an extra $25 million in fiscal year 22 revenues. And again, while FY22 sales tax revenues are expected to increase by about 20%, as Jim mentioned, revenue growth is then expected to slow, which brings us to fiscal year 2023, where the growth is only forecast at 5%. So there's more of a tempering there, consistent again with what Jim shared. For FY23, the revenues are anticipated to bring in approximately $424 million for Transnet and $199 million approximately for TDA. And some related items to this estimate that you saw on your consent agenda today included the transit agency capital program budgets. And then you'll also see the final proposed budget and local agency capital improvement program updates as reflected in your regional transportation improvement program or your RTIP at upcoming meetings. The Transnet estimates were reviewed by the Transnet Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee. Upon board approval, the estimates would be released to both the transit and local agencies for planning and programming purposes. And the action for you today is that the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the revised fiscal year 22 apportionment and fiscal year 23 estimates for Transportation Development Act and Transnet funds.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Clerk, do we have any comment?
Thank you. We have no public comments on this item.
Very good. Do we have comments from committee members? Yes, Councilmember Contreras.
Thanks again for the presentation. And I just want to state that from North County Transit District perspective, I want to address a few things that were mentioned. One of them being, that a large percentage of the customers of North County Transit District live on a very fixed income that is very low. So, we unfortunately are in a region where housing costs are outpacing the nation, yet our wages are still not getting to a place where there's an entry point for individuals who are at a lower economic status to obtain housing. So, when we're looking at how we build our cities, it's really important for us to be focused on smart growth. So that way these funds can be utilized to connect people better to economic opportunity. So I just want to make sure that, when we talk about generous gifts from the federal government, this is actually money that people are paying on a consistent basis through sales tax, through, property tax, whether they own a home or they rent. So, we still have a long way to go here in San Diego County, where we can have a threshold of economic opportunity that really provides a living wage for individuals. Housing affordability, it's not okay that we continue to ignore, in some respects, the big challenges in front of us, because $15 an hour really is not enough to live and thrive in San Diego. So, when it comes to even on North County Transit District side, our bus operators who are crucial, that's the majority of our ridership is on the bus system. We want to ensure that we are creating an environment where there's long-term career paths. So, it kind of bothers me that the word generous is used, because what would be generous is a more fair and equitable tax system. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very insightful, Mr. Miller, and I'm happy to move staff's recommendation.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Do I have a second? Second from Councilmember Contreras. Do we have any further comments from the committee? Hearing none, clerk, let's call the roll.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and that does pass unanimously with those members present.
Thank you very much, Clerk, and thank you to all my committee members. Thank you again to the Borders Committee for joining us today, Councilmember Moreno for being here in that capacity as well. Of course, she's also our MTS representative, so she would have been here either way. That concludes our Transportation Committee at this time, and we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting on Friday, May 6th at 9 a.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and a happy Easter.